I never thought the sound of a single notification could destroy the life I'd built for 10 years. It was a simple ping from my wife's phone. One she probably forgot was still shared with me from years ago when we first bought our cars. But that one GPS ping didn't just reveal her location. It revealed everything I never wanted to believe. My name is Ethan, and until that night I thought my marriage was solid, unshakable. Hannah and I had met in college. Two broke dreamers building a life together. She laughed at my dumb jokes, stayed up late helping me study, and held me when I failed. I used to think that kind of love couldn't die, but the moment I saw her location pop up on my phone, deep in the woods outside town, something inside me shifted. It was almost midnight, and she'd told me she was visiting her mother in the city. The pin showed her at a cabin I'd never heard of. My first thought wasn't betrayal, it was fear. Maybe she was in trouble. Maybe her car had broken down. I called her once. No answer. Twice. Straight to voicemail. My gut twisted, my heart thudding hard enough to make my vision blur. I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and drove. The farther I went, the darker the road became until the city lights vanished behind me. The trees swallowed the moonlight, branches clawing at my windshield. I kept replaying her voice in my head, trying to convince myself this was all a misunderstanding. She'd laugh when I told her how paranoid I'd been, but deep down, I felt something cold creeping in, a quiet voice whispering that I wasn't about to rescue her. I was about to uncover something I could never unsee. The GPS dot didn't move. It just sat there, pulsing like a heartbeat, leading me deeper into nowhere. When I finally saw the faint light between the trees, my breath caught. A small cabin stood there, smoke curling from its chimney, warm and calm like a postcard. But my hands were shaking, because if Hannah was inside, then why had she lied? Why was she here? I stepped out of the car. Every sound magnified: the crunch of gravel, the whisper of the wind, and I started walking toward the cabin that would change everything. The closer I got to the cabin, the louder my heartbeat became, drowning out the chirping of the crickets and the rustle of the trees. A soft glow spilled through the window, flickering like candlelight. For a moment I hesitated at the porch steps, my breath forming white clouds in the cold air. I could hear faint laughter inside her laughter. I'd recognize that sound anywhere. The one that used to melt away my stress after a long day. But hearing it now, in a place she shouldn't be, twisted something inside me. I wanted to knock, to storm in, to demand answers. But instead, I found myself standing there frozen, staring through a small gap in the curtains. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped my phone. Inside, I saw Hannah sitting at a small wooden table, her hair falling over her shoulder, her face lit by the glow of a candle. She looked happy, almost glowing, but she wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man I'd never seen before. He leaned forward, smiling, brushing a strand of hair from her face like it was the most natural thing in the world. My mind refused to process what my eyes were showing me. This couldn't be real. I blinked, hoping the image would change, that I was misunderstanding something. But then she reached out, took his hand and laughed again, soft and familiar. My heart cracked. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind: our wedding vows, the first home we bought, the promises we made under the stars. And now, here she was, holding another man's hand like I never existed. I backed away slowly, the porch creaking under my shoes. A wave of nausea hit me as I stumbled back toward my car. I wanted to scream, to break something, but all I could do was stare at the cabin from a distance, my breath shaking in the cold night. That's when the door opened. The laughter stopped. I froze, half hidden behind a tree as the man stepped outside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and confident, the kind of man you instantly envy without wanting to. And then Hannah followed him, slipping her hand into his. The sight made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. I didn't know it yet, but what I was about to hear next would shatter me even more. I should have left right then, driven away before my heart broke any further, but something inside me refused to move. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was disbelief, but I couldn't just walk away without knowing the truth. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as they stood on the porch talking in low voices. The man said something I couldn't hear, and Hannah laughed again. The same laugh that used to belong only to me. My hands curled into fists, nails digging into my palms until I felt the sting of skin breaking. Then I heard her voice clear and soft. "I'm glad we can finally be together without sneaking around." My stomach dropped. The man leaned in and kissed her, slow and deliberate, and in that moment, everything inside me went numb. I wanted to burst out and confront them, but my body wouldn't respond. I just stood there, staring at the woman I loved wrapped in another man's arms. My brain screamed at me to look away, but my eyes were locked, as if watching a car crash in slow motion. They went back inside after a few minutes, and the sound of the door closing echoed like a gunshot through the woods. I leaned against a tree, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath me. My entire marriage, every memory, every word of love, suddenly it all felt like a lie. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some reason that made sense, but deep down, I knew there wasn't. I stayed there for what felt like hours, trying to gather the courage to face her. Finally, rage started replacing the numbness. I wiped my tears, clenched my jaw, and walked back toward the cabin. The wooden steps creaked under my boots, and I didn't care if they heard me now. I was done hiding. I banged on the door with a force I didn't know I had. "Hannah!" I shouted, my voice cracking from the weight of anger and heartbreak. Silence. Then footsteps. The door handle turned slowly, and as the door opened, I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I was ready to see her face, ready to see the guilt, the fear, the truth. But when the door swung open, it wasn't Hannah standing there. It was someone else, someone I never thought I'd see again. For a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe. The face staring back at me from the doorway didn't belong to Hannah, or the man she'd been with. It was her sister, Claire. My mind froze, completely thrown off balance. "Ethan?" she said, her voice shaky, her eyes wide with confusion. "What are you doing here?" I stood there, lost for words, trying to understand what was happening. I tracked Hannah's phone. I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. She told me she was at her mom's, but her GPS led me here. Claire looked startled for a moment, then glanced over her shoulder into the cabin before stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind her. Her movements were nervous, almost protective. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered urgently. "Please, Ethan, just go home." That made the anger boil up again. "Go home? Claire, I just saw Hannah inside with another man. I deserve to know what's going on." My voice echoed through the stillness of the forest, and I could see Claire's expression twist with guilt and fear. She looked like she was hiding something big. "Ethan, listen to me," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "It's not what you think. Please just trust me and leave." But how could I trust her when my entire world was falling apart right in front of me? "Where is she, Claire? Who is that guy?" I demanded, my voice cracking with desperation. She hesitated, glancing back at the cabin again, then whispered, "You need to let this go. If you go in there, you'll regret it." Her warning sent a chill down my spine, but I was too far gone to stop now. Regret it? What could possibly be worse than finding out my wife's been lying to me? I pushed past her before she could stop me, grabbing the doorknob and shoving it open. The smell of burning wood and perfume hit me at once. Inside, the cabin looked cozy, almost romantic. 2 wine glasses on the table, a half-eaten dinner, soft music still playing. But the man I'd seen earlier was gone. So was Hannah. My eyes darted around the small room, my voice breaking as I shouted her name. "Hannah, come out!" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. And then from behind me, Claire's voice trembled. "Ethan, you really shouldn't have come here tonight." Her words froze me in place. There was something in her tone fear mixed with sorrow that made my anger fade for a split second. I turned slowly to face her, my chest rising and falling like I'd just run a marathon. "What do you mean I shouldn't have come?" I asked, my voice quieter now but trembling. Claire's eyes darted toward the dark hallway at the back of the cabin, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "Ethan, please, just leave before she comes back," she said, almost pleading. That word "comes back" echoed in my mind like an alarm. "What do you mean comes back? She's not here?" I asked, stepping closer. Claire's lips quivered as she whispered, "She didn't tell you the truth about anything." The walls seemed to close in as I tried to make sense of it. "Claire, stop speaking in riddles. Where is my wife? Who was that man?" I shouted, my frustration spilling over. Claire took a shaky breath, tears forming in her eyes. "The man you saw? That's Daniel. He's not who you think he is." My pulse quickened, a pit forming in my stomach. "Then who is he?" She hesitated for a long moment, and then her voice cracked. "He's her ex. The one she told you left her years ago." My knees almost gave out. I remembered the stories Hannah used to tell about Daniel. The toxic relationship, the heartbreak, the betrayal. She swore she never wanted to see him again. And yet here she was, hiding in a cabin with him. "You're lying," I muttered, shaking my head, refusing to believe it. But Claire didn't move. Her eyes were full of pity, not deceit. "I wish I was," she whispered. "She's been seeing him for months. She made me cover for her. That's why I knew you'd eventually find out." The air left my lungs like a punch to the gut. Everything made sense now, the late nights, the sudden trips, the distance in her voice. My heart felt like it was being crushed in slow motion. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said through clenched teeth, barely holding it together. Claire wiped her tears and said softly, "Because I thought she'd stop. I thought she'd come to her senses before you got hurt." I stood there, motionless as her words settled in, and then we both heard Ida car engine outside, the gravel crunching under tires. Claire's face went pale. "She's back," she whispered. The sound of that engine sent a jolt of adrenaline through my entire body. My hands started to shake as headlights washed across the cabin walls, creating ghostly shadows that danced over the furniture. Claire stepped back, her voice trembling. "Ethan, please, you need to hide. If she sees you here, it'll only make things worse." But I'd had enough of hiding. "No," I said firmly, my voice steadier than I felt. I deserved to hear the truth from her. The car door slammed outside, followed by the faint sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. My stomach churned as the footsteps grew louder, closer, until finally the front door creaked open. Hannah stepped inside, her hair damp from the night air, wearing the same jacket I'd seen her leave the house in earlier. She froze the moment her eyes met mine. The silence that filled the room was deafening. Her face turned pale, her lips parting slightly as if she couldn't breathe. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I felt my throat tighten, my emotions spilling out like a storm I could no longer control. "I could ask you the same thing, Hannah. Why are you here? Who is Daniel?" Her eyes darted to Claire, who stood behind me, tears streaking down her face. For a long moment, Hannah didn't speak. Then she sighed, the weight of years in that single breath, and said, "You weren't supposed to find out like this." My heart sank even further. "Find out what?" I demanded. "That you've been lying to me? That the woman I married is spending nights with her ex in some hidden cabin?" She flinched as if my words had physically hit her. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "I came here to end it with him, Ethan. I just didn't know how." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "End it? You said that years ago. How many times did you end it, Hannah?" She stepped closer, tears filling her eyes. "Please, let me explain." But before I could respond, another voice came from the doorway, a deep, familiar one that made my blood run cold. "You don't need to explain anything," Daniel said, stepping inside with a smirk. "He already knows." The moment Daniel's voice filled the room, the air turned electric with tension. I spun toward him, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. He stood there in the doorway like he owned the place, calm and confident, his eyes locking onto mine with a look that made my stomach twist. "You've got some nerve showing up here," I spat, my voice low and trembling. He smirked and shrugged, stepping further inside as if this was just another ordinary night. "I could say the same about you," he said casually, his tone dripping with arrogance. Hannah moved quickly between us, her hands raised as if she could physically hold back the fury building in the room. "Stop it, both of you!" she shouted, but her voice only cracked under the pressure. "There's nothing to fight about." I stared at her in disbelief. "Nothing to fight about? You lied to me for months, Hannah. You said he was out of your life. You made me feel like I was losing my mind for even suspecting something was wrong." My words came out like venom, years of love turning into raw pain. Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Instead, Daniel laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You really had no idea, did you?" His voice was cold, almost mocking. "She's been coming here every weekend, Ethan. You were too busy trusting her to notice." I lunged toward him, fury exploding inside me, but Claire grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Ethan, don't!" she cried. "He's not worth it!" I stopped, breathing hard, my chest aching with rage and betrayal. Hannah finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "Daniel, stop. This isn't helping." He turned to her, his tone shifting instantly, almost gentle. "You said you were going to tell him," he said. He deserved the truth. My head snapped toward her. "Tell me what?" I demanded, Hannah's eyes filled with tears. And for the first time that night, I saw pure fear in her face. She looked down, her shoulders shaking, and whispered, "It wasn't just an affair, Ethan. There's more." The room went dead silent. I felt the world tilt beneath me as I stared at her, unable to speak. "What do you mean more?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She looked up at me, her eyes red and wet. "Daniel isn't just my ex," she said quietly. "He's your brother." For a few seconds, I thought I'd misheard her. The words didn't make sense, like they belonged to some twisted nightmare I'd stepped into. What did you just say?" I asked, my voice barely recognizable, trembling as the room seemed to spin. Hannah's tears spilled freely now, her lips shaking as she whispered again, "Daniel is your brother, Ethan." I stumbled back, my knees almost giving way. My mind screamed impossible. But deep down, a faint, horrible memory surfaced. The brother who vanished from our lives when I was 15. My parents never told me why he left, only that he'd gotten into trouble and didn't want to come back. "You're lying," I said, shaking my head violently. "My brother's name was Danny. He disappeared years ago." Daniel's smirk faded into something darker, more bitter. "That's right," he said quietly. "Danny, I changed my name after I left. Didn't think I'd ever run into you again, little brother." The room tilted, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. "No," I muttered. "No, this can't be real." But when I really looked at him, I saw it. The same eyes, the same jawline I used to see in old family photos. It was him. The brother I used to look up to. The one I'd cried over when he disappeared. And now he was standing here smirking at me, with his hand brushing against my wife's. "Why?" I choked out, tears blurring my vision. "Why her?" Daniel's expression hardened. "Because she came looking for answers," he said flatly. "She wanted to know who you really were. She found me before you did." My chest burned as I turned to Hannah. "You knew? You knew he was my brother, and you still—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. She sobbed harder, collapsing into a chair. "I didn't know at first, Ethan. I met him through work, and when I found out, it was too late." Her words hit me like knives. My entire body felt cold, heavy and empty all at once. Daniel's voice cut through the silence again. Face it, Ethan. You were always the one they loved more. I just took back a piece of what was stolen from me. I stared at him, my rage building to something primal. You didn't take back anything, I said through gritted teeth. You destroyed everything. The silence after that was suffocating, thick enough to choke on. Claire stood frozen by the wall, her face pale as snow, her eyes darting between the three of us like she was watching a tragedy unfold in real time. Hannah was crying uncontrollably, her sobs echoing off the wooden walls, while Daniel just stood there, calm, almost proud of the chaos he'd created. My mind was unraveling, every memory I had being torn apart by this new reality. You knew he was my brother, I said again, quieter this time, my voice breaking. You kept sleeping with him even after you found out. Hannah shook her head desperately. It wasn't like that, Ethan. I tried to stop, I swear. But he threatened me. He said he'd tell you everything if I didn't come back here. I turned to Daniel, rage flaring again. You manipulated her? He laughed softly, no guilt in his eyes. Manipulated? No, I just gave her a choice. She didn't love you anymore, Ethan. I saw it in her eyes before she did. My hands curled into fists, my breath coming out ragged and sharp. You're sick, I hissed. You left our family, destroyed our parents, and now you show up just to ruin what I built. Daniel's grin widened, and in that moment I saw nothing but hate behind his calmness. You always got everything I wanted, he said, stepping closer. The family, the respect, the good life. You never looked for me, Ethan. You never cared that I was gone. His words hit me like a blade twisting deeper with every syllable. I was a kid, I snapped. I thought you were dead. You chose to disappear. Daniel shrugged. Maybe I did. But when Hannah found me, I realized there was still something left to take from you. I lunged at him before I could think, years of rage exploding all at once. Claire screamed as we crashed into the table, shattering glass and sending wine spilling across the floor. Hannah was yelling for us to stop, but all I could see was his face smug, cruel, everything I hated. We struggled, my fists hitting his chest, his elbow slamming into my jaw, until finally Claire grabbed something heavy from the counter and shouted, "Enough!" The crash of metal on wood silenced everything. Daniel froze, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, no one moved. The entire cabin went dead silent except for the sound of my own breathing, rough and uneven. Daniel's eyes blinked slowly, then rolled back as he collapsed onto the floor with a dull thud. Claire stood frozen, a cast-iron pan still in her trembling hands, her chest heaving. Hannah screamed and dropped to her knees beside him, shaking him frantically. Daniel, wake up!" I stumbled backward, my pulse pounding in my ears, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. "Claire," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What did you do?" She dropped the pan, her hands shaking violently. "I didn't mean to. He was going to kill you, Ethan!" I saw it in his eyes. I looked down at Daniel, me brother motionless on the wooden floor, his blood seeping slowly into the cracks between the boards. My heart twisted into something unrecognizable. This was the brother I'd once shared a room with, the one who taught me how to ride a bike, the one I'd thought I'd lost forever. And now, because of years of bitterness and betrayal, he was gone. Hannah's sobs filled the air, wild and broken, echoing through the cabin like a haunting melody. I couldn't even look at her. I stepped outside into the cold night, the air hitting my face like ice. The forest around me was silent, eerily peaceful, as if mocking the chaos inside. My hands were stained with blood. My heart shattered into pieces I could never put back together. Claire came out a few minutes later, her voice trembling. "We have to call the police, Ethan. We can't hide this." I nodded slowly, the weight of everything crashing down on me. When the police arrived, everything was a blur: questions, flashing lights, sirens, and the distant sound of Hannah's crying as they led her away. In the end, they ruled it self-defense. Claire had saved my life. but it didn't feel like salvation. It felt like the end of everything. Weeks later, as I stood by the lake near our old home, I thought about what my life had become. Betrayal, blood, and broken vows. But somewhere in that silence, I found a strange kind of peace. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to finally see who you really are and who was never meant to stay.